The strangest thing about that night wasn't the choice I made. It was the fact that I didn't make one at all. I didn't utter a yes, and I didn't whisper a no. I simply existed in the space between those two words, and somehow, that silence cracked my world wide open. They promised it would be effortless. They told me I was just a guest, a witness to a lifestyle I had only ever glimpsed through the frosted glass of my own inhibitions. Just be there. They said, just look, just breathe. But no one tells you how quickly a spectator becomes a participant. No one warns you that once you realize you are being watched, the very air you breathe changes. Before I unfold the rest of this night, take a second to hit like and subscribe. It really does help more than you know. And if you're drawn into stories like this, I want you here for every one of them. Also tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Are you in a small town where the evenings fall slow and gentle, or in a city where the lights never quite go dark? My name is Clara. For 12 years, I operated under the delusion that order was the same thing as happiness. To anyone looking in from the sidewalk of our manicured suburban street, my life was a masterpiece of stability. Our home smelled of expensive cedar and polished marble. My marriage was a high-performance engine, sleek, silent, and flawlessly maintained. At the helm of that engine was my husband, Julian. Julian was never a man of loud demands. He didn't need to shout to be heard. His presence was a gravity that pulled everything toward his center. He chose the art on our walls, the vintages in our cellar, and the social circles we moved in. He didn't just provide a life for me, he sculpted a version of me that fit perfectly within his world. For a long time, I mistook that molding for care. I felt the relief of a woman who never had to decide, never had to worry about the what-ifs. But comfort is a slow-acting sedative. Beneath the silk blouses and the polite smiles at charity galas, a small, jagged piece of me remained awake. It was a restless hum in my marrow. I'd feel it on Tuesday afternoons while staring at the koi pond, or when the conversation at dinner felt like a script we'd both memorized years ago. I wasn't miserable. Misery requires energy. I was simply dormant. Before we go any further, I want you to understand something. What I'm about to tell you isn't a dark secret. Nor is it a plea for forgiveness. It is a chronicle of the exact moment a woman stops being an ornament and starts becoming a person. Stay with me. Don't look away. Stories like this require your full attention, because the truth isn't found in the events themselves, but in the shadows they cast. It started on a Tuesday that felt too heavy to be ordinary. The atmosphere in our dining room was thick, the candlelight flickering against Julian's composed features. He was pouring a deep red Cabernet, his movements rhythmic and precise. When he looked at me, his eyes didn't hold their usual cool affection. They held a question I couldn't yet read. I've accepted an invitation for Friday, he said, his voice a low vibration. I want you to come. But I need you to be more than a guest. I need you to be the centerpiece. A chill, sharp and unfamiliar, raced down my spine. What kind of invitation, Julian? An old estate. A private salon of sorts. People who appreciate the finer details of human nature, he replied. He didn't explain. He never felt the need to. He simply reached across the table and touched my wrist. You'll be breathtaking, Clara. I've always known that about you. That word, breathtaking, felt like a challenge. In the days leading up to Friday, I did something I hadn't done in a decade. I ignored the outfits Julian's stylist had curated for me. Instead, I went to a small boutique in a part of the city we never visited. I found a gown of midnight velvet. It didn't scream for attention, but it didn't hide me either. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see Julian's wife. I saw a stranger with eyes that were suddenly, terrifyingly wide awake. The estate was an hour outside the city, hidden behind a wrought iron gate that groaned with the weight of history. The house was a sprawling Gothic revival, all sharp peaks and glowing amber windows. As I stepped out of the car, the gravel crunching beneath my heels sounded like a countdown. Julian didn't take my arm. He walked a step behind me, allowing me to enter the grand foyer first. The air inside smelled of beeswax, aged scotch, and an electric tension that made the hair on my arms stand up. There were 5 men in the room. They weren't the caricatures of power you see in movies. They were quiet, composed, and devastatingly attentive. When I entered, the low murmur of their conversation didn't stop. It shifted. It was like a symphony adjusting its key to match a new soloist. I was led to a velvet chaise in the center of the room. I didn't sit, I presided. For the next 2 hours, no one touched me. No one spoke a word that was out of place. But their eyes were a physical weight. They watched the way I held my glass. They watched the pulse in my throat. They spoke to one another about philosophy, about art, about the nature of desire, but they were speaking at me. I was the silent sun their words orbited. I should have felt violated. I should have felt like an object. But as I sat there, draped in velvet and silence, I felt something far more dangerous. I felt visible. For the first time in my marriage, I wasn't being managed. I was being witnessed. I looked toward the back of the room, searching for Julian. I expected to see a flash of jealousy, or perhaps the smug satisfaction of a collector showing off a prize. Instead, I saw him standing in the shadows, his arms crossed, watching me with a look of profound, terrifying respect. He wasn't the master of the house in that moment. He was just another man held captive by the woman I was becoming. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I stood up, the velvet heavy against my legs, and walked straight out of the room. I didn't look back. The ride home was a vacuum. The city lights blurred into long, neon streaks against the window. My heart was a drum in the silence of the car. Julian kept his hands on the wheel, his profile etched in the moonlight. Why? I finally asked, my voice cracking the stillness. Why would you put me in that room? Why would you let them look at me like I was a feast? Julian didn't look at me. Because you were dying, Clara. In that perfect house, with that perfect routine, you were fading into the wallpaper. I didn't want a ghost for a wife. So you gave me to them to bring me back to life. I didn't give you to anyone, he said, and for the first time I heard a tremor of emotion in his voice. I gave you a mirror. I wanted you to see what I see every time you walk into a room. I wanted you to realize that you don't need my permission to be powerful. You only needed your own. I sat in silence for the rest of the drive, the truth settling into my bones. Not everything taken is stolen. Sometimes, we give ourselves away in pieces because we're afraid of the weight of the whole. That night didn't end when the car pulled into our driveway. I thought I could go back to the cedar and the marble and pretend the night was just a fever dream. But the house had changed. The silence was no longer peaceful, it was expectant. Julian followed me into the bedroom. He didn't approach me. He stood by the window looking out at the dark gardens. You're angry, he stated. I'm awake. I corrected. There's a difference. And now that you're awake, he turned to face me. What are you going to do with the day? I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized that our roles had shifted. He had spent years being the architect of my life, but by opening that door, he had surrendered his tools. He was waiting for me to decide the next move. For the next month, a cold war of sorts played out between us. I stopped asking his opinion on the small things. I changed the art in the hallway. I stayed out late, walking through the city, letting the noise and the grit wash away the sterile perfection of my past. Julian watched it all with a quiet, almost reverent curiosity. Then, the second invitation arrived. It wasn't a gala or a salon. It was a simple note left on my vanity. They are gathering again at the coast. This time, the choice is entirely yours. I spent the day by the ocean, watching the tide pull the sand back into the depths. I thought about the woman I was, the woman who said nothing and did everything she was told. And I thought about the woman in the velvet dress, the one who could command a room without speaking a word. I arrived at the coastal house at midnight. This time, there was no Julian to lead the way. I walked through the doors alone. The same 5 men were there, standing on a balcony overlooking the crashing waves. When they saw me, they didn't adjust their conversation. They stopped entirely. The air was different this time. The game was over. The power dynamic had flipped. They weren't watching a centerpiece, they were waiting for a leader. I walked to the edge of the balcony, the salt spray misting my face. One of them, a man with silver hair and eyes like flint, stepped forward. We didn't think you'd come back, he whispered. I didn't come back, I said, my voice steady and cold. I arrived. I turned to see Julian standing near the entrance. He looked older, somehow. Less like a master and more like a man who had finally realized the true scale of what he had unleashed. I didn't go to him. I didn't seek his approval. I stayed on that balcony, surrounded by men who held the world in their hands, and I realized that I was the only one in the room who truly knew what it meant to be free. The night didn't end in a scandal or a grand tragedy. It ended in a quiet, irreversible shift of the soul. When Julian and I finally returned to our perfect home, the atmosphere was different. The routine was gone. The scripts were burned. We sat in the kitchen, the morning sun beginning to bleed through the curtains, and we drank coffee like 2 strangers meeting for the first time. Are you going to leave? He asked. I looked at the house, the marble, the cedar, the cages I had helped him build. No, I said. But I'm not staying here as the woman you married. That woman is gone. Julian nodded slowly. I know. I've been mourning her for weeks. But the woman who replaced her, she's much more interesting. And much more dangerous. I added. He smiled, a genuine, tired smile. I'm counting on it. Now, when I stand at my window and look out at the world, I don't see a landscape I need to fit into. I see a canvas I can tear apart if I choose. I learned that control isn't about deciding what happens next. It's about being the person who decides if it matters at all. Julian thought he was playing a game of chess, moving me like a queen to see how the board would react. What he didn't realize is that the queen is the most powerful piece on the board for a reason. She doesn't have to follow the king. She just has to decide where she wants to go. To you listening to this, I have a question. We all live in cages of our own making. We call them marriages, careers, reputations. We tell ourselves that the bars are there for our protection. But what would happen if someone unlocked the door? What would happen if the person who claimed to love you most offered you a glimpse of your own untapped power? Would you shrink back into the shadows of the familiar? Or would you walk into the room, sit on the velvet chaise, and let the world see you for the first time? I want to know, if someone gave you permission to be the person you've only ever dreamed of being in the dark, would you take it? Or is the safety of the cage too sweet to leave behind? Let me know in the comments. I'm reading. I'm watching. If this story stirred something in you, if it made your heart beat a little faster or your breath catch in your throat, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. Hit that like button. Share this with the people in your life who are still sleeping. And make sure you're subscribed, because the next story might be the one that finally wakes you up. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And remember, the door is already unlocked. You just have to decide when to walk through it. Until next time.